All right, well, I am here to talk about how we embedded pay transparency within our compensation framework. And what we've heard already today, there's a lot of talk, of course, about legislation and CSRD and the EU Pay Transparency Directive. But what I want to talk about is how practically we have embedded it. And our journey began already 5, 6 years ago. So I will talk you through some of the steps. But first, yes, just to introduce myself, because I'm the Inclusion and Diversity Manager. Maybe you would expect a reward specialist or a comp and ben specialist up here talking to you about this. But for the questions later, I have brought two of my colleagues with me, so that's okay. I'm Irish, I'm living in Amsterdam, and I'm working in the banking sector for 18 years now. That's a bit on the background about me. And also on our company. So I work for Lanschot Kempen. Has anyone in the room heard of Lanschot Kempen? No. So we're based in the Netherlands. We are a wealth manager. I think what's relevant to know is that we're a listed company, which means, of course, that we're subject to regulation, banking regulation, and also European legislation. We employ 2,000 people. We're predominantly based in the Netherlands, also Belgium, but we do have operations in Switzerland, in the UK, a small group of people in the US, foothold in Germany, France. So we have many different regions to take into account when we talk about our rewards framework. Well, this was the overview of what I was going to cover today. When I read it, I thought, wow, this is a lot to fit into half an hour. So I thought how to cover all of this and tell you about how we successfully embedded pay transparency into our compensation framework. I want to talk to you about our journey over the last number of years, which started back in 2019 when we implemented one job and career framework. So that was a massive undertaking for our company. I will go through this in a bit more detail, but just to shortly give you the headline, in 2020, we actually did our first pay gap analysis, so long before any talk of the EU Pay Transparency Directive. Then in 2022, we launched an inclusion and diversity policy. I'll tell you a bit about that. That is relevant for stakeholder management and how we communicated about our approach on pay transparency. Then to where we are today is really on CSRD and the EU Pay Transparency Directive. But if I go back to 2019, we started with some basic building blocks. So we had Van Lanschot and Kempen, and these two companies merged. And what we needed to do was, uniform the job and career framework. So have one framework in place. And you heard it mentioned already earlier about, the job levels, pay line structures. So having transparency around that. That's what we really put in place in that time. And that was a massive undertaking involving a lot of stakeholders, the board and the Works Council, HR, communicating, holding workshops, information sessions. So really being transparent and sharing that framework that we were putting in place, bringing everyone along on the journey. Alongside that, we also standardized and renewed our labor conditions. So we made it clear that we offer base pay, variable pay, and then other, what we like to think of as inclusive, modern employment benefits. And we started to look at what tools we have for data-driven decision-making from HR. So we have an annual employee engagement survey. We benchmark our job and career framework on an annual basis. We work with Willis Towers Watson in the Netherlands for that. And then we looked at what kind of HR reporting we had in place. And back in 2019, 2020, as you could imagine, it was more based out of Excel, but to where we are today, now we've really migrated to like Power BI, dashboarding, so we've really matured since then. But those were the basic building blocks. I just wanted to show you a quick overview here of the job and career framework. Well, you can see we have job families, job levels, salary scales, and pay lines. And this is available to all our employees, so it's visible, it's transparent. Within that, we have the salary scales, the bands, so an employee can see, I think it was mentioned earlier, what's the range if you're at a certain level, what's the mid to the max that you can earn within that range. So we had that in place already since 2019, 2020. And maybe a question to you, I'm curious, is how many of you in the audience already have such a framework in place? Okay, because I would say talking about pay transparency and pay equity, this is a very important starting point to have that kind of framework in place. And maybe to mention that for us, it's an ongoing journey on this. You know, we put the job and career and framework in place. We have the policies and processes. As a financial company, we're also looking at mergers and acquisitions. Sometimes we acquire some smaller offices. So we always have to take into account how do we make sure to integrate any acquisitions onto our current job and career framework. So it's an ongoing journey, but to make sure that we continue with one harmonized, uniform way of working. And I mentioned that we embedded it in our policies and processes. So this is just an extract from our employment conditions, which are available to all employees. We have the contents, and within that, we have the reward framework and that job and career framework overview that I showed you. And this is about being clear and transparent, having the clear grading, outlining our reward principles, and also informing our employees that we do benchmark on an annual basis. So we are also looking at what our competitors are paying for similar roles, similar job families. And it was also mentioned that you should have a vision on your pay. Well, our vision is that we pay for performance. So obviously in banking, finance sector, there is an element of performance dealing with clients. So we make this clear and we embed that in our framework and we very clearly communicate about it. We offer base pay, we have variable pay, and that variable pay is also linked to the performance of the employee. So that's all included in there. And a lot of work has been done to ensure that managers are trained and made aware of these principles. Last year especially, we had a big rollout, a lot of sessions for managers about our performance score framework. So that's important, but I think it's an ongoing journey to keep training. And as we go along, we engage stakeholders on a continuous basis. So obviously HR take a leading role with respect to the frameworks, but anything we're doing, we will go to the management board. They will be informed. We will have a sponsor there. They will support what we're doing or give their feedback. We go to the Works Council. We co-create with them. They also are there to represent the employee, so we take into account their perspective. We have employee experience panels and sounding boards where we can ask for the opinion or feedback of the employees and the managers. And we're also using other tool sources of information like our employee engagement survey. We do deep dives on the results there. We have questions on fair pay in there so we can really see if there's any issues in particular parts of the organization. Now, with that framework in place, you see what's the basis, framework, how the system works, the policies, the processes. I want to jump into the pay gap analysis. So actually, I heard a lot about do the right thing versus being compliant. And where we started back in 2020 was more from the perspective of do the right thing. So our basic assumption was that we were adhering to the principles of equal pay for equal work. We don't discriminate. But we wanted to test this. So an Excel whiz in our Comp and Ben team ran some numbers for us, and we could see from that there were some unexplainable differences in pay, and especially in the more senior levels of the organization. And as you can imagine, working in a financial company, the senior levels of the organization are more male dominated. So it makes sense, of course, that we saw some differences there. But this was more based on an internal analysis, and we thought, okay, it's good to disclose something about this in our annual report and commit that we want to look into this further in a more formalized way. So in 2021, we began with formalizing our pay gap analysis approach. And for that, there were many different aspects to take into account. So first of all, we needed, again, the buy-in of the management board. So talking about stakeholder engagement, I had the role to write a memo to go to the management board to propose that we would work with an external party to have external expertise on this topic, and that we would have dedicated resources, both financially for that, but also from the HR team itself to support. So there was a whole process around that. We got the approval, of course, and then came the step of looking at, well, which external party did we want to work with, sorry. So we considered 3 parties. There were some considerations we took into account. For example, one of the parties would hold our data outside of Europe, and then we thought, okay, well, that's not what we want. So anyway, we ended up going with a party based in the Netherlands, and we had to go through a whole process of contracting them, data privacy, IT. You're sending a lot of, very highly sensitive data to them. So we had to go through that whole process. And then we could begin the process. So we kicked off with a workshop. And for that, it was important to get all the HR expertises at the table. And within that workshop, we looked at definitions and approach. So for us, we were initially going to focus on the corrected pay gap. Now, I know today there's a lot of talk about the uncorrected, but we wanted to look at equal pay for equal work as a starting point and check that there weren't any biases in the reward process. And as part of that, we were also getting the results for the unadjusted or uncorrected pay gap, but initially our focus was more on that equal pay, equal work, remove the bias from the process. Some things that we considered in the workshop itself, what employees to include. For example, the management board, if you have working students, so more practical considerations, what pay components, so we have base pay, variable pay, but also we have other generic allowances. How do we define equal work? So for us, we have the job and career framework. Well, we could say we take job level as a proxy for equal work. Then if we want to explain, we calculate the uncorrected pay gap, and then we adjust for variables such as the job level you're in, your years of experience, and then you get to the corrected pay gap. We wanted to look at what explanatory variables we had available. Well, we could already identify around 10, especially looking at the job and career framework. We had like the job family, the job level, pay line. So that really helped us with this process of calculating the pay gap. And then, of course, what will we do with the results? So that was something to consider how we would put an action plan in place. And I briefly mentioned it, but just to say, talking about the different measurements of pay equity, the unadjusted, well, there's also a formula in CSRD which we have to be compliant with, and then we're looking at the average gross hourly wage, the difference between men and women, versus what I just mentioned. If we correct for all the variables, then we get to the adjusted, corrected. The process itself, so I mentioned that we started with a workshop and we identified the definitions and really made sure that all the HR expertises were on the same page, made some agreements with who could gather what data, outlining the timelines. And then we go into the data collection and processing. So the company that we were working with, they had a defined template that we needed to fill. Then we delivered the data. They ran some checks on this. So it was a bit of an iterative process to get to the point that then they could run the analysis. They interpreted the results, reported them back to us. And then the next step for us was the communication and action plan. Well, back in 2021, the first results indicated a corrected pay gap of 4%. So this 4% is an unexplained difference in favor of men, could be as a result of a bias in our pay framework. We decided with the management board that we wanted to be transparent about our approach to the pay gap, and this was already in 2021, so we published the results in our annual report. We also published an article about the results on Equal Pay Day, which in the Netherlands is in November, but we published the results and our approach to our intranet, so to share with our colleagues, talking about creating awareness, bringing the employees along to make them aware that we were starting to look at this and that we take it seriously and that we will take actions to further dive into the pay gap that we see in the employee population. And alongside that, of course, the HR management team were heavily involved. We provided updates to the Works Council. So there was a lot of stakeholder management communication, bringing everyone along. And then, of course, taking actions on the results. So we started with doing an outlier analysis, so deep diving on the employees, what, who, where was the gap being driven. Then we looked at, could we collect any additional variables, additional information to explain it. And we started to give attention to the relevant HR processes, like the end of year compensation process, what was happening there. Also with recruitment, what was happening with new hires. So we, back in 2021, already started to look into these different processes. Then in 2022, and that's a bit more where my role comes in, we launched our inclusion and diversity strategy. And this is published to our corporate website, publicly available. And we had 5 pillars, and we set 2 key focus points. And the focus points we determined were to improve our gender balance. That can be a lever if we look at the senior population to try to get more women into senior roles. That can be a lever to pull to address the unadjusted pay gap. And then secondly, we put in there that we wanted to reduce our corrected pay gap, so we aim to get below 2%. Now for us, this is publicly disclosed. We set these as KPIs. We put them into our annual report, meaning that we were willing to be held accountable by all stakeholders to making progress on these. So just to say, we're taking a data-driven approach, we're measuring, and we're putting KPIs out there that will be held accountable. And by we, I mean ultimately the management board. So then you really see their commitment to make progress on these 2 important focus points. As a result, we saw in 2022 that our corrected pay gap reduced. So we give it attention and we made progress and it came down. And then we continued, okay, what further actions could we take? Again, outlier analysis, very important. And when we're talking about the outlier analysis for that, the HR business partner has a very important role because they're the one dealing with the managers directly on the individual employees, supported by the compensation and benefit team with the data. So then you see really the different HR expertises are involved. We also looked at the new hires, so we did a proper analysis there to see were we actually creating a gap at entry. What you've already heard today, especially with the EU Pay Transparency Directive, well, we shouldn't be asking employees for the current salary, but that has been practiced for us also in 2022. It was, so we started to give that focus and then train the recruiters not to ask for this information. And then we took the step to also implement equal pay dashboarding. So this is an extract, but basically using Power BI with all the data, the ability to slice and dice, break it down by business unit, by pay line. This was provided to us by the external party that we were working with. That's back in 2022. So then you see our approach iteratively becomes more data-driven over time. In 2023, we had a surprising setback. So we thought, okay, we're doing everything right here, and we're really giving it attention. And then we saw that it increased. We deep dived. And again, just there's a lot of text here, but that's just to show you each time we were reporting on this in our annual report to be transparent, to commit to take action. And for 2023, what we saw is what we were doing right. Base pay was going very well. Talking about the new hires, we're not creating a gap there, but when we deep dived into it, when we looked at our promotions and our variable pay, that's where it was going wrong. And what was behind that, again, taking a data-driven approach, is that talking about bonuses, while being a finance company, we had more men, of course, in senior positions, higher bonuses, but also in client-facing positions, so more frequently receiving bonuses. And also looking at promotions, we started to slice the data, and we saw, okay, this isn't proportional to the number of women being put up for promotion, is not proportional to the number of women in the company. What's going on here? We need to deep dive on this further. And so that's what we did. We really took the approach in 2024 to start to embed the mitigating action into the end of year processes. So it really involved, again, the key expertises. So the HR business partners, working with the Comp and Ben team, working with our data analytics experts, using Power BI. We kind of set up a working group as part of the end of year process, and we moved to being more predictive. So we have our compensation tool. The managers would put in the end of year base pay increase, variable pay increase linked to the framework. And then we linked a Power BI dashboard to it. So within one day, we already had a view on what was the base pay gap, what was the variable pay gap. And this is uncorrected, but it meant that we had that 1 day lag, but we could already see within the end of year process what was going to be the impact of the decisions the manager was making today on our corrected, uncorrected pay gap per the end of the year. And with that information, then we could equip the HR business partners to go back to the managers in the business to challenge them or to say, well, with this will be the impact. And then on an aggregated level, we could also take it to the management board as part of the end of year, reporting to them to make them aware, okay, well, with the decisions being made today, this is going to be the outcome or impact on the pay gap that we're going to report on in our annual report against our KPIs for 2024. So then you see we really became more predictive. We could use the data to make decisions within the end of year process. So I feel that was really a good step forward. And again, what we will do in 2025. And alongside that, we also took a data-driven approach to the promotions, what I mentioned, so critically looking at them and equipping the HR business partners with the information to challenge the managers. Shifting focus to the uncorrected pay gap, I won't go into it too much, but we had to align with the CSRD requirements. And I say had to, will have to, but in 2024, we took the voluntary action to disclose our uncorrected pay gap in line with CSRD requirements in our annual report and also write about it extensively. So as part of that process, it started off another working group where we worked with, there's a team for our annual report, the finance reporting team also. We involved the external party we were working with and the relevant HR expertises, not only to make the calculation, but also to look at what we would disclose around it in the annual report. This is just to show you that it's not only the number itself, but with CSRD, you also have to write extensively and determine whether it's a material topic, and for us it was. So this is just to show you, we put in a lot of supporting narrative around our approach on equal pay for equal work in our annual report in 2024. To show you, this is our unadjusted pay gap in 2024. That was the first year that we disclosed it, 27%. It's relatively high, and I think for the financial services industry, you will see this relative to other industries. And on the positive, we also further reduced our corrected pay gap. I think the good thing with CSRD is it encouraged us to take the step to also disclose and put more focus on the unadjusted, uncorrected pay gap. So with that, we again, in our annual report, commit to take continuous action. We will continue with checks in the end of year process. We'll give attention to the outliers. What's already been mentioned, training. Well, for us, it's also training the recruiters about not asking for salary information, for instance, and continuing with the new hire analysis. Where we stand today is, of course, full focus on preparing for the EU Pay Transparency Directive. My colleague here is actually fully dedicated to that, and I think you're all well equipped and knowledgeable on that, so I'm definitely not going to dive into it because it's something we're working on. But I only wanted to share one slide that she shared with me, that this is the depth that obviously all of you and we are also looking into. You know, I feel that we've set a really good framework, policy, practice. We've been working on it for 5 years. We have a lot of stakeholder engagement. We've been communicating with the board. You know, I do feel that we're quite advanced in where we are on our pay gap approach. And then you see here, there's so much more to it and to do to prepare to be compliant with the EU Pay Transparency Directive. But yeah, it's all part of the ongoing journey to embed pay transparency into our compensation framework. So to wrap it up, what we've learned along the journey is, for us anyway, start with the clear and transparent framework that really helped us with subsequently running the pay gap analysis. Engage senior leadership, especially the management board for us, and having a sponsor to support what we're doing that really helps with being transparent in the communication to employees, but also to external stakeholders in the annual report. Involving all the relevant expertises, so both internally, and I haven't spoken a lot about the manager, but obviously they also have a key role, the HR expertises, the Works Council, the board, and externally, well, we worked with a party who's really specialised in data-driven HR, taking a data-driven approach, operating in your company language. Well, we're a financial company, so KPIs is really the language of our company. Once we set those KPIs, then it meant, okay, we're really going to work towards achieving them. Communicate about the approach and the results as transparently as possible. So for us, it was an iterative process, but consistently telling the same story over time, bringing employees along on the journey. And then finally, embed mitigating measures throughout the HR system and processes. So wherever possible in the end of year, in the new hire onboarding, you have to look at where's the different levers that you can pull in order to really make progress. That was it, hopefully in good time. So I will hand it back